So please check there that you're okay with it. And we're going to start the session now. But first, let me share with you a bit of what is EDGE for those of you that are new here. Shared is an impact entrepreneurship hub at Sheridan College. We are a vibrant community, just as the slide says, in which we support each other, and we offer learning supports for entrepreneurs, impact entrepreneurs specifically, but any kind of entrepreneur really, to come and learn about what is this entrepreneurship mindset and how to grow your initiatives, social initiatives, and others like purpose-driven for-profits, all the way to nonprofits, to make a real impact in the world in the most efficient, effective way possible with our, the support of our community and the amazing expertise we have at Sheridan. So that's what we are. This is what we do. It's just 4 bullet points, but basically what we are all about is to provide a safe space that is inspiring also to help founders grow their ideas and ventures. And that support a triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and profit, offering mentorship, learning programs, and inclusive community. And now, recently, we're also providing, have some issues with here you go, some co-working space. So if you've been looking for affordable and centrally located co-working space in the heart of Mississauga, we have co-working memberships starting as low as $100 a month. This includes hot desk access to kitchenette with all-day coffee and tea, meeting room time and discounts, business mailing address, and a lot more. We also have day passes available. All our plans are month to month and flexible for you and your teams. And you're hearing about this. If you're hearing about this first, we're launching officially in now. So please visit our webpage to learn more or reach out for more info and to book a tour. For Sheridan students, if you're here right now, listening to this, you also get a free membership to EDGE to access the learning modules on entrepreneurship and change making. And also, if you're a staff or advisor or part of the community of Sheridan, we also have something for you. So please make sure to either go into that website in the bottom of this slide or sending us an email to edge@sheridancollege.ca. And please remember to stay in the loop. We have all the social media channels. We love to be tagged. We love to hear from you. So please let us know what you think about our workshops, about our amazing guest speakers. And if you come to the space, we will be so happy to greet you there and offer a tour on our spaces. And also, I'm going to use this opportunity to share amazing news with you. This is on behalf of Sheridan College. So Sheridan College is working with Colleges and Institutes Canada to promote the 50/30 Challenge. The 50/30 Challenge is an initiative between the Government of Canada, Canadian business, and diversity organizations. And the goal of this program is to challenge Canadian organizations to increase the representation and inclusion of diverse groups within their workplace, while highlighting the benefits of giving all Canadians a seat at the table. This includes you, founders, startups, and small businesses. Reaching out to this goal is not only about numerical representation, but sustained organizational change, where everyone is equipped and has access and opportunity to grow and develop their talent to fill leadership and board positions, resulting in a stronger social and economic fabric and driving Canadian innovation. So the 50/30 Challenge asks that organizations aspire to 2 goals. The first one being gender parity, 50% women and or non-binary people, or in Canadian boards and or in senior management, and significant representation, 30% on Canadian boards and or senior management or of members of other equity deserving groups, including those who identify as racialized, Black, and or people of color, visible minorities is also called in the governmental website, people with disabilities, including invisible and episodic disabilities, and 2 LGBTQ+ and or gender and sexually diverse individuals, and Aboriginal and or Indigenous peoples. The program and participants recognize Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, as founding peoples of Canada and underrepresented in positions of economic influence and leadership. So on behalf of the 5030 team at Sheridan, we are helping to encourage organizations and individuals to make the pledge. It takes less than 5 minutes to sign. Then you can start to explore resources, including this toolkit, which is a comprehensive collection of equity, diversity, and inclusion resources to help you work towards gender parity and significant representation of equity-deserving groups in leadership and on boards. So I'm going to share the links on the chat later. To this one for the pledge, and the other one is for the works toolkit. Finally, more resources and tools will be developed and added in the coming months, in part by us at EDGE. In the meantime, if you want to figure out how to take on the pledge and move into action, you can reach out to the email on this slide. And we also have friends in Sheridan's Knowledge Mobilization Center that would be happy to introduce you. Please let us know in the chat or send us an email if you need more information. And thanks for your time on this. And we hope that you all take a look and get involved. We also have a few other announcements. Please check out our upcoming public sessions. We have Legal Bootcamp for Startups on Thursday, March 21st. Essential Practices for Successful Entrepreneurs on March 28th. That's one of my favorite ones. I really encourage you to check it out. And Leverage Government Grants for Your Startup on Tuesday, April 4th. And finally, this is actually my favorite part to do in these workshops. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to John Lamb, our guest speaker. John Lamb is entrepreneurship and innovation specialist for the City of Mississauga's Economic Development Office, and more specifically for the Mississauga Business Entrepreneur Center. His role involves supporting innovative scale-up companies in Mississauga or those who wish to locate in Mississauga. His entrepreneurial experiences stem from starting two ventures, one promoting physical activity to youth through Ultimate Frisbee workshops and another connecting people to mental health resources through chatbot technology. John has also taught entrepreneurship courses as a teaching faculty member at Wilfrid Laurier University and led the startup incubators at the University of Guelph, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Sheridan College. He studied recreation, business, and psychology in undergrad, completed the Masters of Business, Entrepreneurship, and Technology in the MBET program from the University of Waterloo, and is now working towards a PhD in higher education with a focus on entrepreneurship education from University of Toronto. If you want to know more about startup-related stuff, John Lamb is your expert in the room. And also I want to say he is one of the most solidarity professionals that I have ever worked with. I deeply admire him, so I'm very honored to have him here today to share with you his amazing expertise. Thank you, John, again for being here. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so you can share your...
Thank you, Marisol. Always the kindest of introductions. Hopefully it won't get to my head.
No, you're awesome. It should go to your head.
Okay, so thanks again, Marisol, for the great introduction. Welcome everybody to the prototyping session. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about prototyping for early stage entrepreneurs, for startups, and as you're kind of around that idea stage. So before we jump into things, we acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day city of Mississauga as being part of the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Seneca and Attawandaron and wider Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat First Nation. We recognize these peoples, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa Chippewa, nations within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and all other peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The city of Mississauga is home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. As a municipality, the city of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by continuing to strengthen our relationship with Indigenous communities. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe space for all Indigenous peoples. So despite how I read this passage to you, I do want to emphasize that, this is the horrific crimes of the past, were real, and we still face a lot of systemic barriers in today's society, and we all have a lot of work to do to move forward together and to work towards truth and reconciliation. Okay, agenda for today. I'll tell you a little bit about idea. I'm going to skip over the about me because Marisol did such a great job of it, and we'll leave it at that before I ruin it for everybody else. And then we're going to talk about why prototyping, what is a prototype, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about some rocket science, and then provide some examples of tools to prototype. And then if we have time, then we'll split into breakout rooms to discuss with one another about how you might get started with actually building your own prototype. Okay, so Idea Mississauga, Marisol mentioned that I'm with the city of Mississauga. It's a little bit complicated. So the city of Mississauga, and I'm part of the Economic Development Office, which is a division, and then the Mississauga Business Entrepreneur Center. Now we are using our newer name, Idea Mississauga. We are the team that's focused on supporting entrepreneurs and innovators, whether you are a startup, a scale up, or the in-between stage, what we like to call the step up. So with that, we have our innovation hub that just opened at Square One Shopping Center right next to the rec room, right above the food district. And that will be open for you to sign up as members very shortly. But for now, if you do want to learn a little bit more, please feel free to reach out to me. We also have our Idea Step Up program meant for companies that are looking to exit out of startup chaos and mature as a company and mature as an organization, and also mature from a co-founding team to actual C-suite leaders of a growing large organization. And we also have our web portal, our website, where we have what we have nicknamed the Murphy tool, which stands for the Mississauga Entrepreneurship Resource Finder. So it's a tool for entrepreneurs and innovators to filter the resources and programs that might be available based on your needs. So feel free to check out our space, our website, or the programs that we have available. Once again, I will skip over this. Just want to reiterate that some of these things that I've learned about prototyping come from my own experience as an entrepreneur, and my experience helping other entrepreneurs, studying entrepreneurship as well. Okay, so before we jump into why we want to prototype, why we don't want to use prototype. Okay, let's start with the negative here. So do not use prototypes if you, number one, know everything about everyone and what they are thinking. Number two, you're working on something that isn't particularly new, it's not particularly innovative, it's not improving anything, nor is it creative. Or number three, you have infinite time and money to chase the wrong paths, and through trial and error, you will eventually get to the right place. So if any of these three apply to you, let's not waste your time. Please feel free to turn off this meeting and hop off. I'm not seeing the numbers drop. Okay, so that's a decent sign. So I'm assuming none of these things apply to anybody in the room today. So that's a good sign. So that means, well, now let's discuss why we actually prototype. So three main reasons that we're going to focus on in terms of prototyping tonight is, number one, we prototype to solve a problem. Number two, we prototype to learn with greater certainty. And number three, we prototype to minimize resources spent. So number one here, solving a problem. We use prototypes because it helps us to actually understand problems that real people are experiencing. Not just you as an individual with your brilliant idea and the idea that you have in mind solves your particular problem, but we use prototypes to assess whether others have a similar problem and whether your idea actually solves their problem in an effective manner such that they will adopt your idea or your product or your solution. So prototypes helps us to figure out what problem to actually solve and how do we solve this problem. Learn with greater certainty. Prototypes are kind of like the rungs on a ladder, if you imagine that. It's a lot harder to jump from the ground to your roof. You can do it with a ladder, and prototypes are the rungs of the ladder that allow you to take small baby steps and continue moving forward. Now, this relates to this third point here about minimizing resources spent. Because prototypes help us to understand the problem and learn with greater certainty, we minimize resources spent because we can identify the problem that we're actually looking to solve, and we learn with greater certainty. So if you're jumping from the ground to the roof, that's going to be very difficult. But if you're taking those rungs on the ladder and taking baby steps, what you can do is you isolate variables and test your market. You test with your customer to see whether you're actually solving the problem. And in doing so, you minimize the effort, the time that you spend, because you're not taking a big leap of faith and seeing whether it plays out as you would expect. And then you don't actually learn anything because there are too many variables and you don't know which one is responsible for perhaps your solution not actually solving the problem. So prototypes allows us to take these baby steps to learn with greater certainty that we're on the right path to solving a problem. And in doing so, we minimize the resources that we spend in terms of time and money. So that's why we prototype. So essentially, it's kind of a balance between effort and learning. We want to expend the least amount of effort and learn the most. So if you're spending a lot of effort and you're not learning anything, that's jumping from the ground to the roof, right? You're gonna have to work really hard. You're gonna have to jump really high, or you're not even gonna touch the roof, right? So if you're spending a lot of effort and nothing is really coming of it, and you're not learning because you're not getting feedback, then that's going to be wasteful. If you spend a lot of effort but you learn a lot, that's pretty decent, right? Because when you're working on something innovative, when you're working on something new, there's a lot of uncertainty. So any learning that you're acquiring, any feedback that you're acquiring, if you can truly analyze it and understand what that feedback is supposed to tell you, then that's a positive sign. But if you have to spend a lot of effort, then, well, now we're taking a look at what that means for our entrepreneurial journey, right? How much runway do we have to continue to spend a lot of effort? So it's good because you learn, but it's inefficient because you have to expend a lot of effort. If you don't even put in any effort and you don't learn anything, that's the same as sitting on the couch and watching The Bachelor because you don't learn anything. Why even bother? Why are you even doing this? You're not going to solve a problem. You're not going to find the right ways to solve problems for real people. So why bother? So what we really want to get to is this bottom right quadrant here of efficiency. We want to expend little effort, yet learn a lot. And that's what prototypes allow us to do. We can sketch something very quickly. We can draft something up really quickly, get it into the hands of our potential customers and get their feedback to see, hey, is it actually solving the problem that you said you have? Or are you even able to use it? And through prototyping, you get to learn. And in doing so, you learn a lot more because, again, you can isolate variables, you can make small changes, and you get that direct feedback from your potential customers or your potential stakeholders or people you're solving the problem for. Okay, so before we jump into things any further, I want to ask a question. You might have heard these terms before: prototype, MVP, product. Anybody want to take a stab at what the differences might be? Feel free to unmute and shout it out or use the chat.
I can go.
Yep.
So I think prototype is basically how your product is supposed to look like. It's basically like the very base idea. MVP, and it doesn't necessarily have to be usable by the users. So MVP is the minimum viable product, and that has to be like the minimum product the users are able to use. So it doesn't have to be necessarily having fancy features, but it has to be the minimum, has to have a minimum number of features to provide the benefit for you and value for your users. And then the product is like an enhanced version of the MVP, while it has like more features and like a better UX design and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's spot on. Have you been in the session before?
No, I'm not.
That's spot on. That's
Thank
exactly
you.
it. I think you articulated it very well. So essentially, to recap, um, let's start with MVP, minimum viable product, and kind of break things down and map it to what you has Vladislava. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, it's right. Yeah,
Okay,
Sledislav.
awesome. So we're going to map it to kind of what you said. I think one of the keywords that I heard there is functionality, right? So when we take a look at the term minimum viable product, the prototype is just minimum, right? There's no functionality. I saw in the chat somebody said blueprints, right? It could be something as simple as that. It's just minimum. Doesn't have to work, right? Maybe it can mock the functionality, right? So that you can kind of test whether it actually functions in a certain way that in the hands of the customers, it kind of gets at the point that you're trying to drive home, and the solution that you're proposing to use. So the prototype is just minimum, no functionality. Maybe there's some mock functionality. The minimum viable product is perhaps maybe one function, right? But it's, again, it maybe works a little, maybe it doesn't work that great, but it works to a certain degree. It's still minimum in terms of this isn't the polished product that you would sell, but at the very least, it works at the core of solving the problem that you're looking to solve. Whereas the product is just the viable product, right? It's viable, it's got all the bells and whistles, it's got all the spinning rims. This is the thing that you're going to sell. And I use product here. What I mean by product, it could be product in terms of tangible physical product, could be a service, or it could be, any other type of solution, whatever you're selling to in that transaction between the customer, whatever the customer is interfacing to solve their problem, that's what I mean by product, right? So prototype is the minimum, MVP, minimum viable product, and the product is just the viable product. So a couple of examples. Utterly ridiculous, which is also utterly delicious. So they are started as a couple that owns a goat farm. I think they have like 400 goats on their farm or something ridiculous. So you can imagine how much goat milk they have access to. Now, typically, goat farms that have goat milk will sell their milk through the supply chain, and they will sell it to goat cheese manufacturers, other goat milk type of products. What this couple did, these entrepreneurs did, was they thought, we love ice cream. Let's make goat milk ice cream. So their prototype, anybody can look up how to make ice cream. You can just look up a recipe and actually make ice cream in your house. It's not that difficult. So that's what they did. They used their goat milk and they made ice cream at home. And they invited their friends and family over to test their ice cream, and they tried out different flavors, and they got some feedback about which flavors people liked the most. And that was it. It was just homemade goat milk ice cream. That's their prototype. Their MVP is what you see here in this middle picture. You can see kind of the pints there on that coffee table. Right now, it's packaged, in a pint, right? And they've got their 6 flavors nailed down, through user testing with their family and friends. They know these are going to be the more popular flavors, so this is what they're going to produce. Their recipe is consistent from batch to batch, pint to pint. They can actually sell this. That's their MVP, and that's exactly what they did. They hosted these ice cream parties, not just their family and friends anymore, their extended network, their friends of friends, and they invited them to ice cream tasting parties, and they could leave with a pint. They could purchase pints of ice cream. So that's their MVP, right? You can see that it's a level elevated beyond their prototype. Now, the image on the right here is their final product. This is a shelf-stable product selling through the supply chains. In fact, if you go to Sobeys, Whole Foods, Farm Boy, you can see on their website where they sell to, but a lot of grocery stores. Now, this is their final product, shelf-safe recipe, right? Made for mass production. Their label adheres to the rules and regulations around food labeling, right? You can see it's got a plastic lid, right? Whereas you can't really tell, but the middle image, their MVP, it's just cardboard pints, but this is all, the product is all packaged and sealed, and that's the final product, right? That is something that can be sold at a commercial level and scaled. So excellent example of how you can progress from prototype to MVP to final product. Another example here is a company called D-Mine Robotics. So the problem is, other parts of the world that have experienced a lot of conflict have a lot of landmines. So this is the problem that the founder saw, and they sought to remove the landmines without blowing up the land, or without the risky efforts of sending somebody out with a metal detector and hope that they don't get blown up. So they decided to create a robot, and on the left here you can see it's very rudimentary. This landmine here, it's just the casing. There's no explosives, but you can see it's just made of wood, exposed wires, right? It's very simple. You can make it in a workshop and kind of test how the arms would move. Does it actually cling to the landmine casing? And try to understand, how to actually go through the process of diffusing a landmine without having to blow it up. So that's their prototype. Their MVP here is a little bit more sophisticated, right? You can see that it's built with metal, and there are tires. It looks like something that you can actually remote control drive and dig in the ground and actually diffuse the landmine. And in fact, this company was starting to test it with actual landmines without explosives, just to make sure that they can get into the ground, inject their diffuser, and get out, and it'll still be safe. So that's their MVP, right? You can still kind of see it looks pretty good, but compared to the image on the right, which was on their Kickstarter campaign, right? Their image on the right is a bit more compact. It's a bit more streamlined. There aren't the exposed wires, or at least fewer exposed wires, right? So this is definitely way more polished. And again, you see the progression from prototype with mimicked functionality to an MVP with limited functionality to a product where there's actually functionality. Okay, so even if it's rocket science, these are 3 images of companies that are pretty well known nowadays. Well, I'd argue one of them isn't as well known, but the company that acquired them is very well known. So anybody have any guesses what these companies might be? These are the early stage prototypes of some very well known companies. Feel free to shout it out or type in the chat. Hey, Nathaniel says you're at a loss. Lego, Crocs, Microsoft, all good guesses. Windows Zip. Something to do with inventory. Yeah, pretty good guess. Yeah. First one is for a PC tower, getting close. Not sure what company though. Getting a lot warmer, that's for sure. Last one looks more like Apple. Again, getting close. It's they're tech products. Okay. Any more final guesses before we reveal the answers? Inventory scanning device. That's a pretty good guess too. Okay, so the one on the left, believe it or not, this is Google's first server. I'm not sure if those are Legos or Mega Blocks, but it's some kind of block. And this tower actually sits in Stanford University. So if you go to Stanford, if you have a chance to visit, you'll see the glass encasing that has this very first prototype of the Google server. Very humble beginning, right? It just looks like a normal PC or a normalish PC that was packed together with some Mega Block or Lego casing, and there's some hard drives in there that act as servers. Whereas now, I don't even know how big Google servers are, how much land mass it takes, right? But again, very humble beginning of a very well-known company. The middle one is a company called Zappos. Not sure if many of you were alive to experience the days of web technology being a very novel thing. Back in the day, e-commerce and online shopping was not common. It was a big deal to order things through a magazine or a catalog. So you can imagine how revolutionary it was when you could order things via the internet. So this company called Zappos, back in the day when things weren't as advanced and you couldn't order things online, or as many things online, the founders thought, hey, we could sell shoes online. E-commerce could be a thing, and shoes are going to be our thing. So they set up a website for people to buy shoes. And what they did was, once they launched a website, once they got the orders for the shoes, they would run to the shoe store, purchase the particular model of shoe in the correct size of the order, and then ship it out. So they were using that as a way to test for the demand of actually buying shoes online. So they didn't really have to code for anything. They didn't have to work with suppliers to work through the logistics of drop shipping and everything. They didn't have to take on any inventory. All they had to do, launch the website, see if orders came through. And if they did, they'd go and actually purchase the shoes themselves and send it off. So again, mimicking functionality, right? All they had to do was put up a simple website. So Zappos is this company in the middle. They were eventually acquired by Amazon. That's why I mentioned that the Zappos might not be very well known, but the company that acquired them is. Third picture here is a company called Dropbox. So I'm sure most of you have heard or used Dropbox. Back when Dropbox was starting, cloud computing was not really a thing. It was very novel. And in fact, it was very slow. So Dropbox, what they did differently and better was, instead of syncing an entire file, they would sync only the changes to the file and upload that to the cloud. So this was very novel because it allowed for instantaneous synchronization of your files. So their value proposition was, you don't have to carry USBs, you don't have to get an external hard drive, you don't have to worry about your files or deleting your files or losing your files. So their prototype is a stop motion video. So what you see here is actually a paper cutout of a laptop, and they put this into a video and they launched it on, I think, Hacker News was the blog site, and they launched this video to explain, hey, look, you don't have to worry about forgetting your USB or uploading your files or losing your camera or your SD cards or backing up your computer, because we got it. This is on the cloud and it's super simple. It's instantaneous synchronization of your files. So they didn't write any code. They didn't do anything except for film, or not film. It wasn't film back then. It was just a recording, recorded a video, a stop motion video to explain their concept. And by posting that on the blog site, they were able to get feedback to gauge demand, and see what other features people would suggest. So Google, Zappos, and Dropbox. Louvrage, am I saying your name right? You've got your hand up.
Yes, John. Sorry, just had a quick question. I know some of these pictures are a little bit old, but would you think VCs today to invest, let's say $200,000, $500,000, $1 million, would they take this into consideration, that this is kind of your basic idea pitch kind of thing, or they would like to see a high fidelity model in the application, the front end of the application? Like, would they really want to see that, or would they work with this as well?
So number one, it depends on which VCs you're talking to. In general, if you're talking to a VC, they want to see sales. Investors invest to get a return on investment. So if you're approaching a VC with a prototype, for example, similar to these three, it might, and you end up getting money, it might be a couple of contributing factors, right? Maybe the market is it's a seller's market essentially, right? So the VCs have a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, and they're throwing their money everywhere. It could be that market dynamics. It could be you have a lot of experience with startups already. You have a lot of credibility, and they're investing in you, not so much your idea. They're just like, okay, we know you, we know your past, and we know your experience. So regardless of what your idea might be, I'm confident that you can figure it out. So let me jump on the train now. And in terms of this level of prototype, I think it would be very rare for an actual venture capitalist to be investing at this early stage if you're talking to them kind of cold. If it's not a personal connection, especially at the amounts that you're talking about in terms of 100,000, 500, or even $1 million. So at the end of the day, if you're looking for investments, focus on getting investment from your customers. That's the best investment. You're not giving up equity. You're actually creating value and recapturing it. So solve the problem for your customers, get the sales, and if you still need venture capital, then that might be the appropriate time to speak with VCs.
Got it. Thank you so much. One thing I mentioned wrong was I wanted to mention startup accelerators in US, which are investing a lot of money. I said VCs. VCs are like a next level up, but I wanted to mention that. But your answers actually gave me the answer basically. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So these are pretty big companies, pretty well-known companies, and they've worked on some pretty large, impactful things, kind of like rocket science. Now, the question is, what if it's actual rocket science? How might you actually prototype something as complicated as a spaceship? Any ideas? Model rockets, diagrams, put Mentos on cola, start simple. Yeah, I agree with that. Blueprints. These are all wonderful ideas. I think you all hit the nail on the head, right? It's as simple as that, right? Starting small, starting simple. And I want to emphasize the learning aspect, right? So if you're building a model rocket, if you're using diagrams, if you're putting Mentos on cola, if you're drawing blueprints, right? The element of prototyping that perhaps we might forget sometimes in the excitement of building something cool is, why are we building this? right? If we put Mentos in cola, well, okay, great. Let's calculate the thrust to weight ratio that this Mentos cola rocket will provide, and is that going to map onto our exit velocity, right? When we're thinking of these prototype ideas, think about how you're going to use them intentionally to learn, right? If you're putting diagrams together, you're putting blueprints together, what calculations do you need to embed into the prototype so that you actually learn from the prototype, so that you can actually use it to demonstrate that, look, there's a path forward here towards an MVP and eventually a product, right? If you build a Mentos and Cola rocket, or if you build a vinegar and baking soda rocket, well, what's that telling you in terms of escape velocity, in terms of can you have people on the rocket, right? So think through these things in terms of the intent and why you're building the prototype. So thank you all for all your suggestions. Those are pretty good suggestions for prototypes. Okay, so what time is it? I'm going to try this. We have 64 people. Let's see how many breakout rooms we can actually have. Because what I want you to do is think about your solution, your product, your service, and I want you to discuss with your group mates, and I want your group mates to challenge you how you can make it simpler. And then how can you make it even simpler? And how can you make it even simpler than that, right? So that you get some ideas on what prototypes you might actually be able to build, right? To mimic the functionality of what you're actually proposing to create and the value that you're really looking to create. So I'm gonna see if we can do 20 breakout rooms. That way there'll be 3 of you in each breakout room, and just discuss what it is that you're working on, and then have your group mates throw some ideas out about how you can make it simpler, or how you can make it even simpler, and then how you can make it even simpler. Yes, I see a question from Nathaniel.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for this session. I just have a question when you talk about critical assumptions and making it simpler. Do you have anything to say about like how you can keep those critical assumptions that might be very complex critical assumptions? Like just at the beginning, a big one that every business will have to face is kind of like, will people actually buy my product? And obviously you should be designing with a certain customer's problem in mind. But how do you handle that? Like not reducing it so simple that you've drop out of these critical assumptions that might be really difficult design parts that you'll inevitably have to come up with.
Thank you for your question. So taking your example of will people buy my product as the critical assumption, I think there are a lot of sub assumptions with that. I think that the end point is for people to buy your product, right? So yes, the question is, will people buy your product? But your definition of success is people buying your product. So what needs to be true for people to buy your product, right? Do you need to connect with suppliers? Do you need to solve the problem in a particular way because there are some barriers to adoption? Does the price have to be low enough, or does the price have to be high enough to communicate a particular prestige in the product or solution or service, right? So that's what that particular question means, right? If you're looking for people to buy your product, if you're looking for people to use your product, what needs to be true? What are some critical assumptions? Do they need to find your product? Where do they need to find your product? How do you need to communicate your value? I think those are things that I'm trying to get at in terms of the critical assumptions.
So what I get from that is that you start with your critical assumption as the problem to which you'll develop a solution, and then you try to simplify that solution down to the very basic kind of problems.
Always.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Purvesh?
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So basically, I'm a technical guy and I do come across several ideas, but to make a prototype, I need help. Like, even though I am a technical guy, I do 3D printing, but when it comes to do calculations, I really need somebody to do the calculations that, okay, whether the thickness is right, the material is right. So where can I get such kind of a help? And in such a case, if I get somebody to help me, how much of my information can I reveal or should I reveal? Because, you have always a threat of somebody taking away your concepts or your ideas. So what's your take on it? Like, how should I proceed if I have an idea? I need help. I need help with, say, funds as well. If I'm sharing that idea to somebody, if he takes away my idea, how can I deal with this situation?
So to answer your first question about where can you find people to get help, Sheridan College Edge, great place. In Mississauga, of course, we have Idea Mississauga, and we're building this community of entrepreneurs and innovators, and also there's University of Toronto Mississauga IQ. They have their incubator. So tapping into where the talent might be, just thinking through, where the talent exists and how you can access that talent might be a good exercise. In terms of the point about people taking your idea, well, there are some critical assumptions about people taking your idea. Number one is that the idea is attractive enough that people want to put in effort to take your idea. Everybody has their own thing going on. So if it's just an idea, there's no evidence of success. So why would people believe in it enough to change their current behavior and do what you're doing, right? And take your idea. So what evidence do you have to suggest that you're already going to be, that you are successful and it's worth an idea that's worth taking? That's critical assumption number one. And then from there, if you're already successful, then it's not really an idea and you're already ahead of the game. So they can try to copy, but will they do it as well as you? If you already have evidence that you're successful, they're a little bit late to the game. So you already have a head start. So there's not much cause for concern there. And I think there's also an element of time, right? How much time does it take for somebody to take your idea and implement it successfully in a way that's better than you implement it? How much time will that take? And if they're the ones that implemented better than you, well, shouldn't they be the ones doing it instead of you? If for example, my second venture, as Marisol mentioned, I was creating a chatbot that connected people to mental health services. The technology wasn't there at the time. And I'm not an AI guy, right? I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer. So I said, you know what? It's better to leave it for somebody else for another time, right? We're seeing GPT 4.0 kind of getting to a level that might be able to kind of mimic that functionality, but it's still perhaps a little bit a ways for something as difficult as sentiment analysis and dealing with mental health challenges, right? I wasn't the right person to do that. I'm not an AI person. I have a psychology background, but I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, right? So maybe that was better left for somebody else to deal with, right? So consider all those elements as you're thinking through whether somebody is going to take your idea or not. Generally, what I find, especially here in Canada, is that people are very trusting. Nobody wants to take somebody's idea. There's a personal reputation aspect to that as well when it comes to stealing somebody's idea. So it's very unlikely to happen. And also your first question about those technical aspects. This is why we're here, right? To break down things in an even more simple way, right? Do you need all those technical aspects, or can we break it down into even simpler steps so that you actually understand whether there's demand before you actually reach out to somebody with talent and skills to build the thing? Otherwise, you're just building the thing for nobody. Then what's the point, right? So that's what I have to say to your question, but I'm happy to take it offline and chat with you further.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
You're
Just a
welcome.
quick thing. Do you guys help up with kind of prototyping yourself over there to make prototypes?
In terms of like actually making the prototype, so
Yeah.
we connect you, and I have a bit of information later on about the tools for prototyping, and I have some suggestions for where you might be able to go as well.
Okay. And in terms of patents and licensing or something like that, can we seek help over there?
Yes, yeah, there are lots of law firms, and we like to work with Bearskin and Parr for intellectual property, and I'm sure Sheridan College Edge has their IP firms as well that you can speak with.
That's right. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we're gonna skip this breakout room for time purposes. I encourage you to get together with a couple of friends, or peers, or family, doesn't matter, and go through this exercise. And tell them, what is your product or service? What are the assumptions? And have them challenge you on some of those, and ask you, are those really the assumptions? And then just listen, right? Get them to ask you these questions, or you can ask the questions and get them to brainstorm. How can you actually make it simpler? Do you need to build all of that all at once, right? What is the purpose of your prototype? Remember, it's for learning. It's to understand your potential customer and whether you're actually solving a problem. So how can you make something simple to address the question of, is this going to solve the problem for the potential customer? Okay, skipping over to this. When should you use a prototype and when should you not? We talked about why, but when? Any guesses? Use prototypes before launching for product testing. Yeah, that's a pretty good stage. Yep. When manufacturing the end product is inaccessible. Yes, a little bit of an asterisk, I would say, a couple of caveats in that particular situation as well. Any other guesses? Not when there is proven concept, not to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, if you're working on something that is already proven, it's not something that's uncertain, then you don't really need to prototype. If you're selling fidget spinners, you don't need to prototype a fidget spinner. When potential investors want a proof of concept to invest in, that's a pretty, if you're already in talks with investors and they want to see kind of what you're thinking, then yeah, a prototype would be a good way to further the conversation. Should use a prototype for focus group research. I agree with that in terms of the research purpose. It's about getting your product or service or solution into the hands of the customers. And if that's in the form of a focus group, then that's the way you go. When you have evidence, your product will sell. I disagree with that. I think that the prototypes will actually help to generate the evidence that your product will sell. Otherwise, you kind of have a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So basically, for something new, yeah, for new things, prototypes help for new things. If it's an old thing, you might not need to prototype. there might be elements that you want to learn about that, you know, prototypes might come in handy. But if you're selling, again, fidget spinners, I would argue that you probably don't need a prototype fidget spinners, unless you're selling some crazy new functionality with fidget spinners. I don't know. When you want to test your critical design assumptions, that's a pretty good point as well. Yeah, it's about testing and potentially isolating those critical design assumptions so that you actually know how the customer might respond based on your assumptions. Okay, so when should you use a prototype? There are a couple schools of thought. There's design thinking, there's lean startup, and there's agile. Those are kind of three very common startup methodologies. This diagram highlights kind of how they fit in with one another. And when to use a prototype would be around that end of design thinking, ideating, to middle of lean startup type of methodology. Of course, there are other methodologies, but at the end of the day, what I want to focus on is a lot of these methodologies, if they're sound methodologies, they will encourage you to focus on the customer. Don't focus on your product. Don't focus on you and what you want to do. Focus on what the customer needs, what their problem is, what their pain points are, and how you can address those pain points. So design thinking is meant to help you understand the customer problem. And you can see at the tail end there, you start to ideate and you start to consider solutions to the customer problem. That's a pretty good point to start using prototypes to suggest, right, after you've empathized and you've defined the problem, you can use prototypes to go back to your target customer and suggest to them, hey, is this going to actually solve your problem? Hey, would you mind using this thing in your day-to-day, or try using it with this mimicked functionality to see whether it might actually solve your problem? And then with lean startup, now we're in the customer solution territory. You can see how it says try experiments, iterate, right, build, right? This is where you're building. And lean startup generally tells you to build MVPs. And again, MVP has more functionality. So they say build it and ship it, and then measure and learn, right? So with prototypes, you might not be able to ship it, right? Because you're mimicking the functionality. But at the early stages of lean startup methodology, right, you can build your prototype to continue to test that functionality, to continue to test whether your solution actually solves the problem. And then you can transition towards building a minimum viable product, something that actually can stand on its own legs in terms of the functionality and actually the value in solving the problem. So when should you use a prototype? When you've defined the problem and you've empathized with your target customer and you're trying to validate your solution, whether your solution solves the problem. As you get closer to understand that your solution solves the problem, then you're looking more at the product market fit, right? What is the form factor that your product needs to have? What other functionality do you need to have in order for people to actually pay for it, right? That's where the MVP kind of starts to come in when you're talking about the business side of your solution or your product or your service. So that's when to use the prototype. And again, I want to reiterate that, it's at this early stage when we're talking about design thinking, lean startup, we're talking about testing hypotheses, right? We're not talking about building the thing so that we can sell it right away. We're still trying to understand the customer problem and whether what we're proposing will actually solve the customer problem such that it will change consumer behavior. Yes, you can solve the customer problem, but if it's not better in a way that, or better than what their current solution is, such that it overpowers the switching cost, they're not going to switch, right? If they have to spend more effort to switch to your product or service or solution, they're not going to switch. They're going to suck it up and continue to do what they do, right? So at this stage, we're still testing hypotheses. Between design thinking and lean startup, we're still testing a lot of hypotheses. So prototypes and MVPs help you to test your hypotheses and isolate the hypotheses so that you can test one at a time and really understand what it is that you need to understand and continue to iterate. So keep in mind that you're climbing up the rungs of the ladder instead of jumping on the roof. So here are some suggestions on how to be very intentional and very mindful as you're building your prototype to really identify the hypotheses that you're testing, what it is that you're going to measure, and how you're going to define success, right? If you have one conversation and they say, oh, this is a great idea for XYZ, let me introduce you to them. Is that going to be success, or does that actually translate to success, or are you feeling a false sense of confidence, right? What are those thresholds for success and failure? And if it meets the threshold, or if it doesn't meet the threshold, what were you going to do? What are the next steps? So the point of this is to be very mindful, very intentional about using your prototypes and to design your research, because prototypes are more meant for research. Okay, so tools that you might be able to use. I'm not sure what y'all are building, but these are tools that I have personally found helpful. Starting from the left here, the 3 W's. This is WordPress, Weebly, and Wix for website building. Landing pages, I cannot overstate the value of landing pages. Right, similar to kind of what Dropbox did with their video. Landing pages take maybe 20 minutes to mock up. You can articulate your vision. You can put in images. You can use Photoshop to design a concept and put it on your landing page. And then you can start using your landing page to take pre-sales, to get people subscribing for your email, or doing an email subscription to say, stay tuned, let me know when your product is ready. That's a very useful way to gauge demand. You can have a feedback session that, or a section that allows people to say, hey, I want this feature. This would be great if it had this, right? You can even use a landing page, and put up e-commerce, right? You can have multiple options of a product and with multiple different prices to see which people will respond to. Are they signing up for a pre-sale for one particular product versus another 3 that you might have available, right? So landing pages are very useful tools if you know how to use it, if you know what data you want to capture. This little coyote thing with a paintbrush in its mouth, this is GIMP. And it is a software that is basically a free version of Photoshop. So it's not as powerful in terms of the tools that it has available, but in a pinch, if you need some photo editing, this is a free software that's available. Canva will be very helpful as well, especially if you're making any mock-ups. Some people like to use Canva. I personally don't like it as much, but if you're already accustomed to Canva, it's very user-friendly and very kind of foolproof because there aren't as many. No, there are still many features, but it's a little bit more user-friendly. The P here in the green, this is in a teal, aqua. That's Microsoft Publisher, and the reason I put this on here is because I actually use Microsoft Publisher to draft a landing page before website building technology was so user-friendly. So all I did was put in images, put in text, put in shapes, kind of mimic what a website might look like. And then there's a function that says view in browser. So then it exports it to Google Chrome or whatever your default browser is. And it displays it as a web page. The only difference is in the URL, it says the file path of wherever you saved the publisher file. But if you're talking to somebody who's not technical, they're not going to know that. So you can, again, kind of mimic functionality and test, build a prototype to test with your potential customers. Microsoft Publisher, very powerful tool. Microsoft PowerPoint, very powerful tool as well. I prefer PowerPoint over Canva. Used in different ways, not just for presentations, but to build images, to build shapes, to build models, 2D models, to save as images. It's very powerful tool that I suggest you look into. Voice recording, if you're doing voiceovers, if you're doing a video, I've got Movie Maker there at the bottom right. Very useful tool, as we've seen with the case of Dropbox. Glide is a free mobile app building software with templates. You don't need to code anything. I have an example that dives a little bit deeper into this, but very useful if you're building a mobile app. Amazon Mechanical Turk is like artificial intelligence, where you're suggesting a solution to have artificial intelligence, but you're using humans to mimic that functionality, kind of similar to Zappos. You might want to look into Amazon Mechanical Turk. Lego, if you're building a hardware product, right? Lego is super useful for you to kind of put together a physical 3D model of what it is that you might actually be proposing to build. Tinkercad is the digital version of that. It's 3D modeling and pretty simple to use. I have an example, and you can actually send that file off to a 3D printer and 3D print your actual hardware or device or whatever it is that you're looking to create. Google Forms, very useful, especially if you're using it for landing page, for your landing pages to collect newsletter or email subscriptions, or to gather feedback. Google Sheets links to a lot of things like the Glide app to Google Forms, so very powerful tools as well. I see a couple of hands raised, and I did not see the questions in the chat. So Nathaniel, would you like to say your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at a stage where our startup wants to be building a landing page like you're talking about. Do you have any, I know you mentioned a couple here, Publisher, as far as I can tell, is not free. Are there any other free sites like that that you could use?
Yeah, so I believe all three of these, WordPress, Weebly, and Wix, all have free versions. It's just that your URL might say whatever your URL is, .wix.com. So if you want to prototype, it's going to work really well. But if you're looking to, provide a more polished look, then you're going to need your specific URL, and then you get into, buying your domain and hosting your site and whatnot. But in a pinch for prototyping, these three website builders will have free versions.
All right, cool. So Squarespace, for example, wouldn't have something like that, whereas WordPress, Weebly, Wix, they'll give you a free kind of limited functionality thing, at least just to point people or interested parties to your business.
I can't say definitively that Squarespace doesn't have a free version. I just haven't used it. So you might want to look into it.
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, questions in the chat. How can you build a website in Figma and your domain registrar is Google? How can we have that website hosted? Or is it even possible? That's a very technical question. I'm not sure. If you buy your domain, you can, depending on where you bought it, that place might also have hosting services. If you bought your domain off Google, then you might want to take a look at Google hosting services. I know Amazon Web Services will probably have hosting availability as well. I've used Just Host in the past. I can't say which is better and which isn't, but yeah, something for you to look into. Lego just might be as expensive to manufacture your product. Yeah, go with Mega Blocks maybe. I don't know, or Play-Doh. How can you build a website? Okay, that's private. Yep, we've answered that. What about 3D functions? So let's get into that. Thank you for your question, Terry. I hope the next couple of slides will answer your question. Okay, so example of Wix, I drafted this website in like 20 minutes. I can't remember what I drafted it for. I think I was trying to, the fictional concept here was selling steaks or something. And it's as simple as picking an image. You can choose your own image. You can take your own image and put it on there. You can use their templated image, or you can use Pexels, which provides free images, kind of like there's another image provider, which the name escapes me, but Pexels is free, given that you also provide credits to the authors, or the people who actually took the images. So, landing pages are super simple. This landing page took me 20 minutes, and I think I had 5 minutes of lag of uploading images. So Wix, definitely a good example. Play around with the templates, write the text that you need. It doesn't need to be overly wordsmith. You don't need to get it perfect. The key here is to get it done. All right, done is better than perfect. Glide app. So the Glide app, I made a mobile app for my family to keep track of recipes. All I had to do was start with a Google Sheets. So I listed some categories. What is the name of the food product, the food, the time it takes, the difficulty, number of ingredients, and listed the instructions there, dishes to clean, and then linked an image through Google Drive. That's Google Drive with the images, and this is the final prototype. I had an icon on my phone that I can click into, and you can choose a template through the Glide app on how you want to display your app, for which purpose. But essentially, I created this app where you click into it, you can choose a recipe, you can filter the recipes based on the categories that I've set in the Google Sheets, and then you can click in and actually see the actual recipe. So very powerful tool. There are many other templates and other displays for the app as opposed to just this one, but just wanted to give you the example. And then this is an example of Tinkercad. I was transplanting my palm trees into a larger pot, but the roots had taken hold of the bottom barrier that allows the pot to have a bit of basin of water, so there's a bit of drainage. So I decided, hey, let's 3D print my own basin platform for the old pot so that I can use it for another plant. Tinkercad, all you have to do is manipulate shapes, and then you can change the shape into a negative zone to make a hole, or a positive zone, and you can manipulate this and you can 3D print it. And that's kind of what it looks like with the holes in there. And then you can export it to these 3 file types, and it kind of depends on which 3D printer you use or which 3D printing service you use, that and which file type they use. So you can save that file and send it off to a 3D printer and have your prototype 3D printed. And depending on where you live, most places, most libraries, public libraries might have some kind of makerspace. I know for the city of Mississauga, we definitely have makerspaces at some of our libraries, and also there is the renovations happening in the central library. So later on in the year, they will have more upgraded equipment as well. I know Brampton has their makerspaces as well. So quick Google search, makerspaces or 3D printers near me, or look for your local library and go talk to the librarian and see if they have any information about this. And that's it. That is everything for the prototyping session. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. I used to draft websites on Wix for fun in high school. Absolutely, good job. You can do that for your startup venture. The prototype has images of puppies you're already sold. Amazing. That's why I put them in there. My internet is a bit spotty, so I apologize. There's any lagging, that's okay. 3D printing available at, so not at Idea Mississauga, but City of Mississauga's libraries will have 3D printers. I think there's 3 or 4 locations that have 3D printers. Sheridan, Marisol, you can speak more to that.
Yeah, you are invited to come to the hub, and we have resources for you. But yeah, you will have to come and see. we have also, well, Sheridan and the 3 campuses, we have a ton of resources there. And we tailor the resources depending on the asks and needs of our members. So please come discover them. Also, John, I don't know if you want to make a final words. I do have to ask everybody here to please share their feedback about this amazing session. Thank you, John. I'm going to put also the QR here for everybody to see if you prefer to use your phone to provide the feedback. Please let us know how you felt, the things that you like the most. Thank you again, John, for this amazing, as always. We have John is a friend that is in ongoing supportive to Edge purposes and the things that we do. So John, again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has with the time remaining, or if you want to follow up, then please feel free to reach out to Marisol and folks over at Edge, and they will send you right over to me.